Amazing. I love it.
All right, welcome Budget Committee members. Nice to have you back. We do only have 5 on right now, Chair Harrington and Ms. Fuller. So leave it to you to do some housekeeping while I search for our other members, and Commissioner Willie will be about 20 minutes late coming out of another meeting.
Great, thank you. Clerk Mouse, are we live tonight? Are
Yes.
we live? Great. We can go ahead and start the presentation. Before we get started, I did want to make sure that the Budget Committee received the email from Michael earlier today. As you may know, the county experienced some difficulties with our website, and he provided an email with a link to a backup site that included all of the documents. So just orienting you there. And I just want to say welcome to the Budget Committee, and thank you to the community members for serving the community in this important role. And thank you, as always, to our elected officials who serve the community. And I will go ahead and turn it over to our interpreter and ask to give some brief instructions in Spanish for anyone wishing to hear the real-time interpretation of tonight's meeting. So next slide.
Thank you. Yes, muy bienvenidos a todos. La reunión de hoy se ofrecerá en inglés y español, así que tome un momento ahora para seleccionar el idioma en el que le gustaría escuchar la presentación hoy. Si se une a través de una computadora de escritorio o portátil, haga clic en el icono del globo con la leyenda Interpretation o Interpretación, ubicado en la parte inferior derecha de la pantalla de su computadora. Si está usando la aplicación de Zoom a través de un dispositivo móvil como un teléfono inteligente o tableta, presione los 3 puntos con la leyenda más o more en la parte inferior derecha o superior derecha de su pantalla y seleccione el idioma que prefiere escuchar. Si desea escuchar la reunión en inglés, seleccione inglés, o si prefiere español, por favor seleccione el español. Puede cambiar de canal en cualquier momento para escuchar la presentación en otro idioma, pero debe seleccionar uno para escuchar todo el contenido de hoy. Si tiene alguna dificultad, por favor notifíquenos y vamos a hacer lo mejor posible para ayudarle. Gracias. Welcome everyone. Today's meeting will be offered in English and Spanish. So please take a moment now to select the language you'd like to hear the presentation in today. If you're joining us through a desktop or laptop computer, please click the globe icon with the legend interpretation located at the bottom right of your computer screen. If you're using the Zoom app through a mobile device such as smartphone or tablet, press the 3 dots with the legend More at the bottom right or upper right-hand side of your screen and select the language you prefer to hear. If you want to hear the meeting in English, please select English, or Spanish if you prefer Spanish. You can switch the channels at any time to hear the presentation in the other language, but you must select one in order to hear all of today's content. If you have any problems or difficulty finding these options, please let us know, and we will do our best to assist you. Also, we have the slides in Spanish, so we can go to the next slide, please. Tenemos las diapositivas disponibles en español, así que si le gustaría seguir la presentación, la reunión de hoy con las diapositivas en español, por favor ingrese al sitio web del condado www.co.washington.or.us y de ahí va a poder seleccionar la opción para encontrar la reunión de hoy y encontrar las diapositivas en español. Today, we also have the Spanish available in Spanish, so please go to the county's website, www.co.washington.or.us, and scroll down to today's meeting, and you will find the option for slides in Spanish if you would like to follow along in Spanish. Thank you. Gracias.
Victor, could I ask you to mention that the county's website may still have technical difficulties? And if someone would like the slides in Spanish, we can provide them via email.
No problem. Tenemos el sitio web del condado, puede de que tenga fallas técnicas, así que si desea de que se le envíen la presentación, se le puede hacer accesible por correo electrónico. Así que por favor notifíquenos y se la podemos enviar de ese modo.
Thank you very much. And with that, I will turn it over to Rodney Rhodes, our interim CFO, to go through the agenda, including introductions. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I greatly appreciate that. And we thought we were going to be short a committee member, but we just had one join, so we have a quorum. What I'd like to do this evening is go through the agenda for tonight. We'll do some welcome and some introductions. We will talk about the election of the new committee chair and review and adopt the budget hearing process. We'll hear this evening from the North Bethany County Service District. At the end of that presentation, as we have done throughout the course of this budget process, we will hear public comment. We will take a brief intermission, and just a note, we are scheduled for the urban road maintenance district presentation to begin at 6:45. So if by chance we finish before then, we will take a intermission until 6:45 to take up that presentation this evening. Again, after the presentation, receive public comments, and then we'll talk about the next steps and then adjourn the meeting. Next slide, please. So at this time, what I'd like to do is I'd like to ask the committee members to just introduce themselves and talk about how long they have served on the committee. We will start with our Board of Commissioners and Chair Harrington. Chair Harrington.
Good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine Harrington. I'm the chair of the Washington County Board of Commissioners and have been so since January of 2019. So this is my 4th budget year. Thank you for serving, and it's good to see you all tonight.
Excuse me, I'm sorry, I was muted. Commissioner Fye, please.
Good evening, everyone. My name is Nafisa Fye, Commissioner for District 1, and I was elected in 2020 and sworn in 2021, and have been on this budget my 2nd year now. It's good to be here. And I just want to congratulate Chair Harrington, Commissioner Treese, and Commissioner Willie on winning their election, and look forward to working with you for the next few years.
Thank you, Commissioner. And Commissioner Treese.
Thank you, Commissioner Fye. And my name is Pam Treese. I'm Commissioner for District 2 in Washington County, which includes Bethany, Cedar Mills, Cedar Hill, Raleigh Hills, parts of Garden Home, part of Beaverton, part of Hillsborough. But I'm really pleased to be here tonight with everybody. This is my 4th budget cycle, and I value the input that we get from the community, as well as our budget committee members here. So thank you, and thanks to the staff for all the work you've done.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Rogers.
Commissioner Rogers is not on right now, or Commissioner Willie, so we can go to the budget committee members, starting with Mr. Reed.
Hi, I'm Dan Reed. I'm resident of North Bethany. Been on this committee, I want to say, about 5 years. So glad to be here again.
Thank you, sir. And prior chair, Sarah Beachy.
Good evening, commissioners, and thank you, Rodney. My name is Sarah Beachy. I'm a resident of the North Bethany area. And I guess, yeah, I think Dan and I have served longer than most of the commissioners. And I think we've outlasted some of the county administrators. So I think we've both been on since about 2017. And I've been, I don't know that we had a chair the first couple of years, but I've been the chair for a couple of rounds and been through about 5 budget cycles.
Well, thank you very much. We appreciate your service. Thanks again. And we'll kick it back to you here in just a few minutes. Just to understand, Commissioner Rogers has joined us. Commissioner Rogers.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you, Kevin, for promoting me. Roy Rogers, I represent District 3, and I would tell you that you did have a chair in all years since the beginning. It was required by state law. So there was one, and I thank you for your service as well as everyone tonight. That's great.
Thank you, sir. Ms. Gruber.
Hi, I'm Alicia Gruber, and I'm sorry, we have COVID going through our house. I'm a little flustered today. I live in North Bethany, and this is my first budget cycle.
Well, thank you. I think we had the pleasure of meeting, and sorry to hear about that. I hope everything goes well. Mr. Reed.
Sorry, do we have another Mr. Reed?
I think you got him already.
My apologies.
That's
yes.
all right.
Mr. Young, I apologize.
We do not have Mr. Young on, but we do have Mr. Zhu on. So Fuhan, are you with us?
Yes, I'm here.
Mr. Zhu.
Yes.
Please state how long you've been with the committee, please.
This is the second year for this position.
Thank you. I appreciate that. And now I'm going to turn it over to prior chair, Ms. Sarah Beachy, who will start the meeting. This will require the nomination of the new chair. We will need a motion and a second for the new chair, please.
Thank you, Rodney. Good evening. And as past chair, I'd like to open the floor for nominations for our committee members to nominate a new chair for the 2022-23 year.
I would nominate Sarah Beachy for another round as chair.
I would second.
Thank you. We have a second. Do we have any other nominations? Okay, hearing none. I think can we take a vote by hand to record it, properly record it? Raise your hand in favor. And I don't know if someone's keeping track. If we can, 1.
Yes, Sarah, I can keep track. It is passing 8-0.
Okay. And any nays? Raise your hand. Okay, seeing all in favor, 8-0, the motion passes. Thank you.
Congratulations on another year. At this time, at this time, we'd like to go through the process of adopting the budget hearing procedures. Chair Beachy.
Do you want me to read over these or?
No, I think everyone has received the procedures via email.
Okay.
So if we could just take a nomination in a second and then vote.
If everyone's been able to review the budget committee procedures for the North Bethany County Service District for roads, if you're all in favor of proceeding with those as is, if you could raise your hand in favor. And any nays, please raise your hand.
Just for the record, Chair Beachy, we need an official motion.
I'll make the motion to adopt.
Sorry, jumped ahead. If we can, right. Yes, if someone would like to move to adopt the procedures, and then we'll need a second.
Made a motion to adopt.
And
Second.
second.
Thank you, Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese. Then our official vote, if you raise your hand for adoption of the procedures. And any nays, please raise your hand. I think the motion passes 8-0. Is that correct?
That is correct, Chair
Yes.
Beachy.
Thank you. So the motion passes.
Thank you, Chair Beachy. Next slide, please. So just want to stress this evening, as we have done with all of our meetings, and this is the final meeting of our budget committees. We do encourage community input throughout the process. We encourage folks to come in, ask questions. If you're not able to do so, then we would also encourage email communication of questions or comments, and we'll post those on our website as we receive those and provide those responses. Later on in the meeting, we will have an opportunity for community input. At this time, however, we will begin our process of discussing our with Ms. Tillman, our community equity and diversity efforts, and some of the things that we've initiated this year as a part of our budget process. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Tillman.
Thank you, Mr. Rhodes, and good evening, board and budget committee members. For the record, my name is Latricia Tillman. I'm the Chief Equity and Inclusion Officer, and I just want to begin by thanking you for your service. I also want to just begin with reflection, and the question I believe in our budget process is coming up around why are we investing in equity? And I think many in our county and our workforce and our community and the country are expressing dismay and despair and anger over the mass murder in Buffalo. The presence of extreme racist violence in our country is a stark and painful reminder of why we must continue to lean in and invest in dismantling racism in our governmental systems and structures. This kind of anti-Black violence is not new. It has existed in our country for over 400 years, and it's really exciting that Washington County has committed to dismantling institutional racism in all of our governmental policies, programs, and processes. And I want to appreciate last year's budget committees for directing the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement to support you all in building equity into the budget process, and want to appreciate staff in the Office of Equity, Inclusion, and Community Engagement, our Equity Leadership Council Committee focused on equity policy, and across the county departments for taking on the challenge to launch our budget equity tool and the process to explore how we are investing in equity. As the slide notes, we asked county departments as they were preparing their budgets to consider what the data is saying around the presence of racial and other inequities in our service delivery system, to be transparent about where inequity exists so that we can confront that and uproot that, and to listen deeply to community through our budget town hall last December and again in March, and through any number of other community engagement opportunities, because our community partners, our clients, our community members are very clear about where barriers to equitable county services exist and how they would like to see them be dismantled. As we focus on investments toward equity, we are focusing on equitable access including but not limited to language access and access for people living with disabilities, equitable quality of services, and most importantly, equitable outcomes. The equity initiatives section of the budget page, which is on our website, is included. There's a summary in the budget book that you all have access to of the various equity investments that were proposed by departments, and a more detailed equity report that is published in a link on the county's budget webpage. Next slide, please. What's very exciting about the deployment of the budget equity tool in this initial year is that we have learned so much about how we are investing in culturally specific services, in building the capacity of our staff to identify inequity and to identify strategies to build more equitable service systems, as well as our investments in interpretation, translation. This number does not include investments in staff who spend all or part of their time focused on equity. And as you know, personnel accounts for a significant proportion of our budget. So even though the $25 million is exciting, we also know that this is an underreport of our actual investments in equity. Additionally, more than 180 bilingual Washington County staff receive a bilingual pay differential. And their role is to help meet the needs of our community who has limited English proficiency. We do have additional bilingual staff who do not currently receive the pay differential. And so again, that 180 FTE is an underreport of the number of staff who are helping bridge a language divide and eliminate a language access barrier. And we did not aggregate the actual budgetary impact of that bilingual pay differential. So as I mentioned, this is our inaugural year using the budget equity tool. We have learned a lot in the process, and we will continue to evolve and improve the budget equity tool and the analysis of our budgets going forward. But again, we appreciate your directive and are looking forward to continuing to work with you to evolve the process going forward. Thank you, and I'll turn it back at this point to Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you, Ms. Tillman. And just side note, I can't tell you how much effort has gone in, not only with Ms. Tillman's staff, but also the staff across the county to assist in preparing the information and providing some of the equity information that Ms. Tillman presented this evening and what is presented throughout your budget. At this time, I'd like to turn it over to our Director of Land Use and Transportation, Mr. Stephen Roberts. We will begin our presentation this evening. Stephen?
Stephen, just before you start, Chair Beachy, committee members, Commissioner Willie has joined, so you have 9 members of your committee.
Thank you, Clerk Moss. Stephen?
Thank you. Sorry, my screen just froze for a moment there, but I've got you back. So good evening, Budget Committee members, and glad to be here with you tonight to walk you through the budget presentation for the North Bethany County Service District for Roads. As Rodney said, I'm Stephen Roberts, Director of Land Use and Transportation. With me tonight is Sheila Giambrone. Sheila is our Senior Administrative Services Manager for the department, and she'll be working with me as we run through the slides for this budget presentation. And then, of course, the both of us will be available to help answer any questions that you may have at the conclusion of the presentation. Go ahead and go to the next slide, please. So we'll walk through tonight with you just some background on the North Bethany area. I know you're all very familiar with it, but for community members that may be watching, we'll just walk through some of this background information. I want to describe to you the North Bethany Transportation Funding Strategy and walk through that. We'll talk a little bit about the status of development and road improvements in this new growth area. And then we'll conclude with the actual budget overview for this year. And I would say we'll entertain questions along the way, but we do also have a defined period after the presentation for budget committee questions, and can always go back to a particular slide if that's helpful to answer any questions that you may have at the end there. And if anyone's following along in their budget summary book, I just wanted to note that this is Fund 215 and starts on page 316 in the budget book. And with that, next slide, please. Next slide, please. So the North Bethany County Service District, if you look at the map on the left of this slide, you'll see what we call the Bethany Community Plan area. It's located north of Highway 26. It's an urban unincorporated area, meaning that it's not located within a city. And so the county provides several of the direct services to communities in that area, which includes road improvements and road maintenance. In the map on the right, the blue outline within that Bethany Community Plan area, the blue outline depicts the North Bethany sub-area, and that boundary also aligns with the boundary for the North Bethany County Service District for roads. The area, as you can see, it's located north of Springville Road and east of 185th Avenue. And I would point out that the district includes the Portland Community College Rock Creek campus, but does not include what's called Arbor Oaks, which was a development on the north side of Springville Road on either side of Joss Avenue. And apologies, catching my notes up here. The service district for roads was established as a special district under Oregon Revised Statute, Chapter 451. Voters in the district boundary approved its formation and the tax rate of $1.25 per $1,000 of assessed valuation in 2011. The district plays an important role in implementing the North Bethany Transportation Funding Strategy, and that means that it's also important to really implementing the North Bethany Community Plan sub-area's vision of a complete and connected community. Next slide, please. The community plan and service district area totals about 700 acres. This area was originally included in the urban growth boundary in 2006. Planning for the area was finalized in 2012, and development began in earnest in fiscal year 2013-2014. At the full build-out of this community, we anticipate about 4,200 total residential units in the area. And in 2012, we were still feeling the impacts of the Great Recession and assumed about 20 years to achieve the build-out of the community. However, after about 8 years, we are now at about 70% build-out in the community. And within that, you've got some statistics there, about 3,900 units, really more than 90% of the total expected units have received a land use entitlement. So that's a precursor to being able to actually obtain construction permits. And of those 3,900 units, about 2,900 units, or about 70% of the total estimated units at build out, have actually been issued a building permit. So those are either under construction or already completed and occupied. This is a section break. I just want to stop here and just ask if there are any questions or comments before we move on to our next section. Okay, well, let's move on to the next slide, please. And one more, please. One more slide, please. Next slide. Well, oh, there we go. Thank you. So we're just going to move in and provide a little bit of background. Oh, sorry, if you could go back. Thank you. So I want to go back and cover a little bit of an overview of the North Bethany transportation funding strategy that I mentioned earlier. So again, this was approved in 2011 as a part of the North Bethany community planning process. As noted there are a total of 14 road improvement projects that were identified within this funding strategy. 12 of those are eligible for public funding, and we'll talk a little bit more about that as we go. And there are 2 additional projects that are not eligible for public funding and must be constructed completely with development. So the strategy assumed, again, a 20+ year build out, and there are a variety of revenue sources that are a part of the strategy. And again, the assumptions were that revenue would accrue over time and that the projects will be delivered over time. So the funding sources include TDT, or the Transportation Development Tax. That is a county-wide charge that all new development pays, or redevelopment when it adds additional traffic to the transportation system. And it's designed to help defray the costs of providing additional capacity on the road system and transit systems to help accommodate the additional demand of development. In the North Bethany area, there is a supplemental transportation system development charge. So it functions very similar to the TDT, but it applies only in the North Bethany Community Plan area. We had Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program, or MSTIP funds. That was a component of this funding strategy, and that is countywide property taxes. So county general fund that is applied to transportation improvements, and that is across the county. We have trust and agency. Those are typically contributions that a developer makes when there's a physical or feasibility constraint that precludes them from being able to build a required transportation improvement. There's just some physical limitation on their ability to build. That is typically what happens. So they provide a fee in lieu, if you will, to the county, and we hold that money until such a time as either the county or another developer are able to construct that required improvement as a part of a later project. And then last, the reason that we're here tonight is the North Bethany County Service District for Roads, which, as I mentioned earlier, is the property tax generating district funded for the purpose, again, of helping to fund these transportation improvements in this community plan area. Next slide, please. Next slide, please.
Stephen, we are having a bit of a computer lag, so I believe we're just going to have to wait for them for the slides to catch up.
Okay, I was wondering about that. Thank you. So let me move on here. So we won't spend much time here, but this, we lost it. But the slide that you have, that we have up on the screen right now, this is the list of projects that I alluded to earlier. The 12 projects in the top portion of the table are those eligible for public funding. The 2 listed at the bottom and with yellow are the projects that must be built completely by development. And we'll talk more about the list here as we go. Next slide, please. So this slide depicts the approximate breakdown of those different funding sources that were assumed in the transportation funding strategy back in 2011. And so you can see the relative proportions of the different funding sources that were assumed. The 2 largest are the Transportation Development Tax and the North Bethany transportation system development charge, each of those representing roughly almost a third of the total funding that was assumed. And I neglected to mention earlier, for transportation development tax, that is a countywide tax, as I said earlier. In the North Bethany area, 75% of TDT revenues generated by development in North Bethany are essentially recaptured, if you will, and dedicated to funding the projects that were on the project list that we looked at earlier. And the North Bethany County Service District for Roads, again, our purpose for being here tonight, that was assumed to be the third largest funding source at about 20%. And then the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program at just around 14 to 15%. And those funds have actually been expended already, and we do not anticipate any additional funding from that revenue source going into this, fulfilling this strategy. You can see the list of revenues was designed to match the list of proposed expenditures. So in the project list that we just saw, the total estimated costs were about $69 million. This revenue chart shows an assumed ability to generate $69 million in revenues, again, over time. Next slide, please. I wanted to talk just briefly about the way that the North Bethany County Service District for Roads budget fund works, Fund 215. As I mentioned, there is the property tax itself that the service district generates. Those monies go into this budget fund, which is represented by the large blue block in the middle of the slide. As we generate revenues from those other funding sources that I mentioned, those are transferred into this budget fund and held there until such time as those funds are expended on particular projects. And so as you look at the budget, you'll see transfers in and then expenditures going out toward projects. Next slide, please. The mix of revenues, it was always intended and known that it would vary over time as the development goes through different stages into maturity and then generates ongoing revenues. And so this is simply a slide that depicts since the initiation of the district in 2011, how that mix of revenues has played out over time. And you can see the lighter blue color at the top of some of the bars was the Major Streets Transportation Improvement Program. Those funds were received and expended over about a 5-year period, and that funding source is done. And you can see the orange and gray colors are the system development charge and transportation development tax. So as development is occurring, we're generating a fairly substantial amount of revenue from those revenues, from those funding sources. But as we achieve completion of the community build out, if you will, those revenues significantly decrease. Meanwhile, as development's been occurring, and maybe this is a good time to go to the next slide, please. So as development is occurring, the property tax revenue generated by the service district has been increasing over time. And you can see as development really took off in about fiscal year 15-16 and 16-17, there were some pretty significant increases. And as we are approaching build out in the community, the growth is reduced but still growing. And the tax revenues will continue to provide an ongoing source of funding for this district after the completion of the initial build out of the community. Next slide, please. One more, please. So this map really depicts what I was alluding to earlier about the number of permits that have been issued, just showing it in a map form. So where you see blue properties, those are lots or parcels where we have actually issued a building permit at what we anticipate would be the ultimate development for that area. There are a few areas where you can see some new lots and subdivisions have been identified, but no permits issued yet, but those will be building out over the next probably 3 to 5 years. And so Again, as I mentioned, we'll be generating some of those revenues from system development charges and transportation development tax over these next few years, and also increasing the amount of revenues generated by the property tax district, the service district, over these next few years. Next slide, please. This is that same project list that we saw earlier, but with an attempt to use colors to try to depict some of the progress that has been made. It has been fairly substantial in terms of achieving the implementation of the project list. The projects that you see in green, there are 5 of them, are completed. And the projects in I believe there's 2 that are in a kind of bluish purple color, are projects where we anticipate some upcoming construction activity in the near future. And then there are 4, I believe, gray projects. Those indicate where some of the work has been completed, but some work remains to be done to achieve the completion of those projects. Next slide, please. This is a map. Again, it depicts essentially the same information, but in a different way. On this map, where you see solid black lines on some of the roadways, that indicates projects that have been completed. Where you see red dashed lines, those indicate projects, or well, one project on Springville Road where funding has been allocated for construction, but the construction is not completed yet. And then where you see the black dotted lines, those indicate locations where we do anticipate development will be constructing some additional improvements within the next 18 to 24 months. Where you see the lines, the projects that have sort of a yellow highlight, those indicate projects that were funded and managed by the county. The ones without the yellow highlights have been funded by and constructed by development. Next slide, please. So I know those of you that live in the district are quite familiar with it, but I wanted to just show a few pictures to demonstrate both needs and some progress to date. So this is the portion of Springville Road that on the map we just saw is in the red dotted color, which means that there is some funding allocated for construction, but the improvements have not been completed yet. In the photo on the far left, you can see the improvements that have been completed at the PCC entrance on Springville Road. And then the road tapers back down to the 2-lane cross section, and that's where we anticipate constructing in the upcoming year or 2. We'll be constructing improvements to bring Springville Road up to its full 3-lane with bike lanes and sidewalks urban standard. And then the 2 photos on the right represent, again, just that existing condition on Springville Road where it has not been improved to its ultimate standard yet. Next slide, please. This is a completed project. This was what we called Springville Road Phase 3. And this is the area between Kaiser Road and Joss Avenue. It has been improved to 3 lanes, which means 1 travel lane for vehicles in each direction, a center turn lane, and bike lanes on both sides with sidewalks and street lighting. Next slide, please. And so as we are approaching the build out of Springville Road, we are beginning to turn our attention to deficiencies on Kaiser Road. And so I just wanted to again share some images of what that looks like today. So the 2 photos on the left are taken from approximately Brugger Road. The one on the left looking to the south, the one in the middle is looking to the north. And the image on the far right is taken from the approximate location of where Shackelford Road will eventually intersect with Kaiser Road, again looking north toward the Sato Elementary School and the Ridgeline development. Next slide, please. So at this point, I'm going to turn to Sheila, and she's going to walk us through the budget overview slides.
Good evening. Based on our estimation of revenue and expenditures for the current year, We anticipate our beginning fund balance for fiscal year 22-23 to be 14.7 million. Adding to this are revenue estimates for next year that include property taxes generated in the district, system development charges, and transportation development tax revenue generated on new development. Adding fund balance and new revenues, we estimate the district to have 18.9 million in resources. Breaking down our expenditures, you will notice that all funds are budgeted as reflected with the zero ending fund balance. The proponents of anticipated resources from the district are primarily appropriated as professional services to allow for project flexibility. Interdepartmental expenditures include the district's portion of countywide indirect costs, along with staff charges for project management and inspection of the projects being built. Operating transfers out include the district's portion of the road fund indirect charges for department leadership and staff administration of the district. And finally, capital outlay includes our estimate of $675,000 for right-of-way acquisition on our project slated for next fiscal year. Next slide, please. This slide outlines a breakdown of the project costs. Full project funding is budgeted to allow for flexibility as we begin construction and to preserve funding for the projects that we have committed to build. The budget provides some funds for the closeout of Springville Road, Kaiser to Joss project, as well as design and construction for work on Springville Road from Joss to the Portland Community College entrance. The budget reflects funding for the increased cost of this project. 5.6 million is allocated for design and construction of the Kaiser Road complete street improvement between Springville and Brooker Roads. And an additional 800,000 is budgeted for interim pedestrian improvements on Kaiser Road north of Brooker Road. Next slide, please. And this map is just another way of depicting that. I think there might be some automation or some little thing that shows where the projects are located.
Might have to click through a couple more.
Sorry about that. I thought
there was some animation.
Yes. So just depicts, as previously we talked about the budget for these projects where they're physically located.
Thank you, Sheila. And I neglected to mention at the outset that we convene what we call a subcommittee of this budget committee, which consists of Chair Harrington and Commissioner Treese, whose district this area is located in, and then our 5 community members. And they play a great role in assisting us in helping to formulate our project allocations, and that shapes then our budget requests that we're bringing forward to you tonight. So we really do appreciate everybody's time and effort that goes into helping us to shape these requests. So we certainly appreciate that. And then I think we're now at the time for questions and discussion.
Chair Beachy, I can help you facilitate this section.
Sure thing. Thank you.
Welcome. Do any commissioners or budget committee members have any questions at this time? Not seeing any questions.
No.
Chair Beachy.
No.
Do you have any, did I hear, was there a question there? I had a few. If I may, if there was no one else, I want to give everybody else a chance.
No, it is all yours, Chair Beachy.
Okay. All right.
I saw Dan's hand just went up, actually.
Oh, Dan?
Yeah, thanks.
Go ahead.
Just briefly, at our subcommittee meeting, we talked a little bit about the interim pedestrian improvements on Kaiser, kind of near the Sato Elementary School to support pedestrian safety, people walking to school. And there wasn't a lot of, I guess, definition of what the improvements might be at that time. Have there been any design recommendations since then for what would actually be implemented there?
Yes, we had a more detailed slide, I think, when we met as a subcommittee that we didn't include in this presentation, but we have identified that for the different parcels, it's really varies from parcel to parcel as you go through there, depending on development status and how much right-of-way exists. But we do have a pretty good idea of what we'll be building. It'll be mostly separated, what we would call a separated asphalt path. So an asphalt path with some separation from the roadway for most of that length. And then there is one parcel just north of Ernst Street that has very limited right-of-way currently, and so we'll be constructing a widened shoulder on the roadway, but installing a curb between the walkway and the roadway to try to help provide some separation between pedestrians and the vehicle traffic there. And on that curb, we would also include some bollards, white posts, again, to just help drivers be aware that there is a pedestrian passageway there on the side.
Okay, thank you. I'm remembering some of those slides now that you mentioned them. I think I had a question at the last meeting about providing lighting along that section as well to help with pedestrian safety. So I just want to make sure that
Yes,
is considered as well.
yes, thank you. We shared that note with the team that's going to be actually working on designing those improvements. And so I do think we have opportunities perhaps on existing utility poles to try to incorporate some lighting.
Great, thank you.
But, yep, thank you for that suggestion.
I would just follow up with that, you know, as you develop that, you know, the plan, if we could be copied or, you know, updated as those things progress, because it's nice to know that what we talk about in here, like what the timeline is and when these things are getting done. It's like, you know, you want to see that what you're doing makes an impact and is having a difference. Yeah, if we could be notified as committee members, it would be nice, because I had follow-up questions to that also, because there is a section where Shackelford is being worked on from and I always get the east and west confused right there. But on the school side of the road, and it looks like they're making way for a sidewalk, and it's almost connected. I was just over there today, so I was wondering if, and I don't know that that's the county, or is that a developer that's working on that? Does anyone happen to know?
Yes, that is being done with development.
Okay.
Yeah.
So do we know if it's specifically just being expanded asphalt area, or is it going to connect with a actual cement sidewalk?
So the developer at that location will be building the required sidewalk. They'll actually be finishing the sort of ultimate urban kind of improvement with the curbs, the gutters, the sidewalks, and street lighting along that portion of the frontage. And then our interim connections will just help essentially connect up those properties where development has occurred and improvements have been made.
Right, because it looks like if you're traveling to Sato from Ernst, there's going to be a gap, and it looks like there's some, and you butt up against some vegetation and things. So that's it. Well, we had proposed 2.1. I know it's being reduced to 0.8 in the proposal here today. Is that what the 0.8 would that go to, that Ernst to make that connection there? Because that's obviously like the next big.
Yeah, that's correct. That's one component, would be that segment between Ernst and that development that you just referred to, closing that gap. And then there would be some additional gaps that need to be closed between Brugger and Ernst as well. And so we'll be trying to fill all of those gaps. Yeah, and we think that $800,000 will cover that cost.
Okay, excellent. All right, that's what I want to make sure on the pedestrian improvements. If I could go ahead, I actually wanted to say I appreciate I noticed reflectors got put in on Springville Road in the little curve, the dark curve where all the trees are before that. That was just a couple months ago. So I always appreciate the county paying attention and making those little, the small improvements that can help with safety before our bigger things can come to fruition. My understanding was the timeline for that Springville, I don't know what part it is, part 3, 4, for that little curve. I thought it was we were aiming for it this year, and I know there are weird delays and things like that, but do we have an estimate on when that might be started?
I'd have to confirm that. I can track that down and we can share that information back to the budget committees. I don't want to speculate too much, but I think we're probably a year or so away from construction at this point.
Okay. And then as far as our proposal for tonight, to address Kaiser Road, Springville to Brugger, I know planning and things, but what would be an estimated timeline to your best knowledge from breaking ground on that?
That is a really excellent question. I think I'll also probably want to check back with the project staff and just try to get a better sense of the timing for that as well. So I'll follow up on both of those for you.
Okay. Looks like Commissioner Rogers, you have your hand up.
I don't want to interrupt your flow if you have more questions, but I do have one whenever you're.
No, I was done with the projects specifically.
Okay, well, then I'll just jump in with a simple question. Obviously, this is up in Pam's district, and she would have much more familiarity. The genesis, obviously, of this particular fund and the funding was that the development was occurring. The county didn't have enough money to do the projects that were necessary, and so there was a special service district that was initiated. So we all understand that part. The great fear from the other districts at the time, and continues to be, is this heavily subsidized by any county funds? Because if county road funds are going into any extent, that means that they're disappearing from a distribution in other districts. And I noticed, that was my only question on this at all, was that there is some transfers in. They're described in some detail on 317 of our budget materials. But Stephen, this is to you. How much road fund, general road fund money is going in? And is that at all being backfilled by future development charge funds that are coming from this, or transit development funds? I don't know where it's all coming from, but tell me how much the general operating money for road funds is being used in this particular area.
I understand the intent. I'm struggling a little bit with maybe how I could quantify that. I think there, as you noted, there were MSTIP funds, which is general fund, that were allocated here, but that is a county-wide program, and so it goes to fund projects all throughout the county. Some of that in areas like this that are growing, and some in areas that have long since grown and just didn't get the road improvements that they needed at the time. So I think that was about $10 million, and the question, could it have been spent elsewhere? Yes, I think so.
That's not, Stephen, I don't mean to interrupt you. That's not so much. I know what happened with the MSTIP funds, and that it should be distributed equally and around the county, and this was a priority, and it should have been a priority. I'm asking, is there any more backfilling that's going on? Because I know the community interest was to have these roads projects done sooner than the funding. Obviously, that's always the case. It's always timing. So is there any other Mstip funding going into this particular set of projects than what was originally planned?
No, sir.
No? Okay.
No.
All right.
Yeah, and that was part of the reason for the funding strategy. Fundamentally, as you'll remember well, it was that the existing funding sources really can't fund the level of improvements that are needed in some of these greenfield development areas. The needs are significantly larger, and so that was creating the additional funding strategy, and both the property tax district and the system development charge for transportation were really intended to help ensure that this community funded many of its own needs.
I mean, I'm not an expert on the numbers, but from the information you guys have given us, specifically for Mstip, it was estimated to be $10 million or 14.5% of the total 69 million. And that's on page 19 of the presentation. And then according to the bar graph on page 21, it looks like Mstip money runs, there's not a value on it, but it runs fairly evenly as a portion of the total for like the last 4 years. And that looks to be under maybe $500,000 or something like that. So it's kind of an even amount. So it's, I mean, that if I understand what you're getting at, that's, yeah, that total was estimated proportion wise, and it's being used proportionally for every year.
Yeah, and thank you for pulling that slide back up. This is slide 21 in the presentation. The lighter blue at the top, that is the MSTIP funding, and you can see it actually varied somewhat from year to year.
The dark blue and the light blue, that's hard
Right.
to do.
Exactly. So the dark blue at the base, that's the property tax revenues, which again, on the next slide, it sort of shows in more granular detail how that's been growing over time. But yeah, the MSTIP funds sort of came in that 5-year period, have been expended, and then that's the extent of the MSTIP commitment that was made for this community.
So we're still on track to that estimated 10 million of the pots of money from the original 2011 plan.
Correct.
We're still on track.
Yep.
I had kind of related, I know we discussed it, but I was trying to remember the exact answer was the question to sunsetting of our North Bethany special service district tax. I was trying to find my notes from the budget committee, and if anybody could refresh my memory on what we talked about on sunsetting.
Yep, I'll be happy to. So the service district, the taxing district, if you will, was intended to, in some ways, it's the fail-safe, if you will, to help ensure that there's an ongoing stream of revenues to help ensure that all of the projects that are identified in that funding list can be constructed over time. So as I mentioned, there was the MSTIP, that money has gone into the system and been expended, and the system development charge and the transportation development tax funds are coming in, and those will be expended over time, and we'll start to see significantly less of that revenue. And then the property taxes from the service district will be sort of an ongoing stream of revenues that can just help ensure that the projects in the list all get fully funded and constructed over time. So the sunsetting, there is no prescribed sunset for the district, and I think it would be a determination by the Board of Commissioners at some point in the future to determine whether it would be appropriate to sunset that district once it's met its initial intent and purpose. And so they would have that authority to do so.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Great question.
Rodney?
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Chair Beachy and members of the committee. I just wanted to remind you that staff is taking notes this evening of all of the questions that are being asked. We will make sure those are documented and responses are provided in advance of the public hearings when we go over the course of the next few weeks. So if you haven't gotten your complete answers tonight, we will make sure that we get those to you through that communication.
Great, thank you very much. Do we have any other questions?
Not seeing any additional questions, Chair Beachy.
Thank you. Okay, and how do we want to open this up to public comment? Is that my understanding?
Yes, I can take care of that for you, Chair Beachy. Now is the time for members of the public to provide comment to this North Bethany Budget Committee for up to 2 minutes per individual or 5 minutes for recognized CPO groups. Would any of the member of the public wish to provide comment at this time? I'll give you just a moment to raise your hands. Okay, I'm not seeing any hands, Chair Beachy. So we'll close that, and just to note, the next meeting of this budget committee will be June 1st in the evening. That will be the public hearing for each of the special districts, and the finance team will get information on the specific time for this North Bethany meeting time. So with that, I will turn it back over to Mr. Rhodes.
Thank you very much, Chair Moss, or Clerk Moss, excuse me. So at this time, we will take an intermission. We do have the Urban Road Maintenance District scheduled for 6:45 this evening. We will be waiting for all of the committee members to join us for that meeting. So with your permission, we will take a recess until 6:45 this evening, unless we get a quorum in advance of that. And Clerk Moss, if you could notify us, we greatly appreciate it.
Yes, I can. So Chair Beachy, I'll leave it to you to adjourn this meeting for your North Bethany Service District for roads.
Great, thank you. If there are any other comments or questions from any of our committee members? And seeing none, we will adjourn this meeting until our meeting on June 1st.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
If I could, just to clarify, we will start at 6.